just 3 lines from her. This brave, loving weaving is signing our lives back, and women are ready. This comes from Amulet for brave women. So Mani Rao and Nishi Kulagurtha, they have been brave women who have talked to you. And now here is Dr. Annie Finch and myself, proud to proclaim that we are another set of brave women. So it's really an honor and a pleasure to have you. IPPL is very happy to host you. As I said, she's an award-winning poet, translator, cultural critic, performance artist, a person with myriad talents. So yes, the question is where to begin. I was sort of, jotting things down as to what I should ask her. And I was going through her biographies, I was going through her writings. Dr. Finch, you have a mother who has been a poet, and you have a father who was a pacifist. So born to parents, one a poet, another a pacifist. I will begin with something that has been plaguing our minds for the last couple of years or so. We have had the Russia-Ukraine war, which flared up again in 2022, and of course the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas-led Palestinian troops. So my first question is, do you think poetry can bring over a change in warmongers?
I have never been asked this question before, and I love this question because you get right to the most important thing. And I do think yes, but I think in order for this to happen, we actually need to redefine poetry. Throughout the 20th century, poets have been writing poetry against war. Most poets are pacifists and have very idealistic visions for the world, but things have gotten worse, far worse, right? I was raised in the 60s. I had anti-war poetry all around me, poets protesting. Didn't do any good, really. Things are worse than ever, truly. Yeah. So I have a very radical idea about poetry, one that probably most poets I know would hate and get very angry at me for. But I'm increasingly feeling a sense of desperation and a sense of courage. What do I have to lose? So I actually feel that poetry does have a chance to stop the warmongers, but only if poets reclaim the essential aspect of poetry, the defining feature of poetry, which has been so forgotten since the advent of the printing press over the last 500 years or so, that now we think of poetry as basically heightened language, metaphorical language. I'm sure any of you can think of millions of examples of the way people define poetry. I've taught poetry writing for decades. I begin every class by asking the students, what is poetry? And they say, it's speaking from your heart. It's language without rules. It's imaginative language. It's saying the unsayable. They have all kinds of fancy ways and they end up saying poetry is whatever you want it to be. They usually end that way. Well, in my experience of life, saying that something is whatever you want it to be is pretty much writing it out of existence. You've neutered it. You've taken away its defining qualities. And we have done this helter-skelter, higgledy-piggledy with poetry. Why is an interesting other question. I'll just give you a little clue. My sense is the reason we have done this to poetry is because of the dominance of certain meters in English. I'm talking about English poetry now, and obviously in India you have wonderful metrical varieties. I'm talking about English, the poverty of English in terms of rhythm and meter. And it's been dominated by iambic pentameter since Milton, right? So I think this is the reason that people just threw it all out the window. The hell with that, we don't need that. The modernists in the beginning of the 20th century, we broke the pentameter. That was their goal. Ezra Pound said so in so many words. To break the pentameter was our aim. So I think this is probably the reason. But whatever the reason, we are stuck with this right now. We're not really stuck, but we are in this very tight place where poets are constantly, oh, the war, the bodies, the hell, da 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 da, pacifist doesn't do any good at all. I think it's because poets have forgotten our actual job. I think our job is meter or rhythm, and I think this is the defining characteristic of poetry. And we need to go back to our roots as an oral culture, a culture where humans talk to each other with our bodies, with our voices, with our hearts, with our spirits. And we did that in meter. And this is how poetry became revered in the first place. So I actually feel that if poets begin to learn, and I've been teaching not just iambic, but metrical diversity, a range of meters in our language of English that so many people are speaking, which is right now, in a way you can say the poverty of English rhythm is what's causing this misery around the world, because